Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Stuff I Learned
in the House of Bamboo.
We're back, baby. And this week, I've showered. You're welcome. But I have a few spots, so I apologise. I grew up thinking Britain were the plucky underdogs. I'd see our cricket team winning the World Cup, our rugby team winning the World Cup, our football team. Well, never mind the football team. But the point is, I'd see our little country on the map and think, how's this little country doing so well in all of these sports? To me, we were a great underdog story. Then I went to school and learned about World War I, World War II, this horny boy. And I grew prouder still. We stopped the Nazis. But I tell you what I didn't learn about. The British Empire nervously sips tea. Yeah, it turns out we're not the underdogs. Which may explain why nobody votes for us in Eurovision. The British Empire was in fact the biggest empire that's ever existed. We were essentially the bad guys in Star Wars. So, yeah. Let's learn about the British Empire. I'm gonna put the date somewhere so I don't lose track. Boop! There was no British Empire. There wasn't even a Britain. You've got Ireland, mostly independent, little bit of English control. Scotland, completely independent and a close ally of France, England's biggest rival. Wales, under English control. And finally, England, the largest and most powerful country at the time in the British Isles. And ruling England at the time was King Henry VII. He hired Giovanni Caboto to go find some trade routes and make England some money. On Giovanni's travels, he bumped into North America, becoming perhaps the first European to bump into the continent since the Vikings. Then Henry VII dies, and Henry VIII is in. Yay! One of his actions was to bring Wales in and give them representation in Parliament. Then he bins his first wife, and the Catholic Church. He boldly declares himself the King of Ireland, but nobody really listens, and it doesn't really mean anything. Then Henry dies, and his son Edward takes the throne. Then Edward dies, and his sister Mary I becomes the Queen of England. She marries King Philip of Spain, a devout Catholic. Then a load of Protestants are burned at the stake. Then she confiscates a lot of land off Irish people and gives it to English people for plantations. Then she died. In her place we get Queen Elizabeth. That's the wrong Elizabeth. That's the one. Elizabeth is a real daddy's girl and devout Protestant, which makes King Philip really cross. He controls the Netherlands, whose mainly Protestant population were also cross, and rebel Dutch ships. Ooh, that's a tricky one to say, you know. Rebel Dutch ships. Ha! Here we go. Rebel Dutch ships. No! Rebel Dutch ships would raid Spanish ships full of cargo from their colonies. Elizabeth then allowed these rebels to shelter in English ports. This made Philip even more angry. At the time, Spain had the world's largest empire, and they were taking hundreds of tons of gold and silver over from South America. So there was plunder to be had. One of the most famous pirates or privateers was Sir Francis Drake, an Englishman who was a hero in England but a villain in Spain. In 1573, he took 20 tons of Spanish gold and silver in one raid. Then in 1577, he circumnavigated the whole globe, claiming California on the way for England. No biggie. Elizabeth then asks Walter Raleigh to explore the New World, set up a colony, and civilize the natives. She also continued taking Irish land and giving it to English owners for plantations, and referred to the Irish as barbarous and rude.
Who the f*** is that guy? Go, please!
Who's for tea?
Me, please, Mrs. Doyle.
Tea! I'm fine, Mrs. Doyle.
And what do you say to a cup?
Golf cup!
He loves his cup of tea.
Golf!
There you go.
Golf!
Then Elizabeth chops off Mary Queen of Scots' head, because she may have threatened her throne, and she was Catholic. King Philip at this stage is about as cross as it's possible to be, so he sends a Spanish Armada from Spain to the Netherlands with the idea of invading England. This fails massively. The English win, the Spanish run away, they lose all their money, and Philip may literally shit his pants at this point. Good old Liz, ever the thinker, goes to Sir Francis Drake and says,
"The Spanish are in trouble.
go do an English armada. Bring back some silver, disrupt Portugal, and destroy all their ships.
So Sir Francis Drake sails over there with an English armada and gets battered, defeated. And then the English lose loads of money. Yay! Equality. To try and put some money back in the English coffers, Elizabeth sets up the East India Company, which is designed to trade with India and the Indian Ocean. So the East India Trading Company had a monopoly on all trade coming to and going from the Indian Ocean area. Elizabeth eventually dies with no children, and James VI of Scotland becomes James I of England. So being Scottish, maybe the Irish were in for an easier time now James was king. Nope. He set up the Ulster plantation and took even more land away from the Irish and gave it to Scottish and English settlers. Then King James turned his sights to the New World and set up Jamestown, Bermuda, and Plymouth. Initially in Jamestown, the leader was John Smith, who had very good relations with the natives and was able to win them round with good diplomacy. But then John Smith had to go to England due to an injury. The guy who replaced John Smith was unfortunately an ass. So relations with the natives went rapidly downhill and it ended up pretty much just being a war. The people that were working on the farms around Jamestown were called indentured servants, and basically they would be from all over Europe and they would promise to come over and work for 3 years for free in return for their crossing and maybe a bit of land at the end of their work tenure. Then the first slaves from Africa were brought over by the British to work on the farms in 1619. Unfortunately, the slaves were easier to obtain and cheaper to get, so they became preferred to the indentured servants. Then there was an event known as the Indian Massacre. The native tribes joined forces in an attempt to rid the land of the foreign forces, and 1/3 of the English-speaking colony was wiped out. Between 1608 and 1624, 6,000 people came to Jamestown from Europe, but only around half of them survived. And this was due to disease and attacks from the Native Americans. Eventually, King James had seen enough, and he took Jamestown from the Virginia Company, who were managing it, and made it a royal colony. Spain and Portugal had amassed huge wealth through trading with their colonies, and England wanted in on the action. This hunger for profit led to cash crops like tobacco or sugarcane being planted, and England could make even more money by selling slaves to the New World. So one of England's most shameful feats was the creation of the Atlantic Triangle, a profitable and evil trade route that saw British ships set off to Africa to get slaves, head to America to sell them, and then take the sugarcane and tobacco to England. And this trade route played a huge part in funding the growing English Empire. England was growing stronger. It had huge wealth from trade and governed a large population that could be trained as soldiers. English forts began to litter the African coast to support the slave trade. Up to 3.5 million African slaves were sent to the New World to work in the cash crop farms. In 1625, Charles I becomes the King of England. He was, how do I put this? A shit king. He created vast unrest through taxation and drove England into a civil war. Oliver Cromwell won the war, turning England into a republic. Ireland tried to revolt. Cromwell shut them down. Some colonies said, "We're loyal to the crown," so Cromwell blockaded them. Then he went to war with Spain, grabbed Jamaica, set up some sugarcane farms, propagated more slavery, and died in 1658. Then King Charles's son, Charles II, became king. In 1665, Charles decides to have a pop at the Dutch, grabbing the colony of New Amsterdam and turning it into New York, which has a ring to it. Then Charles dies, and his brother, James II, becomes king. Most of the English lords were Protestant, so those lords went to King William, the Protestant king of the Netherlands, and said, "Can you invade us? There's a Catholic on the throne." King William accepts, and by 1689, he's on the throne. Scotland saw the bloody mess that England were in and thought, "I fancy a wee bit of this colonialisation myself," and founded Caledonia in 1698, in what is now Panama. The Spanish saw the Scottish colony of Caledonia and blockaded them, saying, "I'll have that," and Scotland had to go home with their tail between their legs. This was important. Scotland had lost loads of money and was pretty much bankrupt. So in 1707 came the Act of Union. England paid for Scotland's debts and Scotland joined England, becoming Great Britain. And that was the start of the most powerful empire the world has ever seen. And that's pretty much it. The start of the British Empire. In the next video, we'll go over the rise of the British Empire. Thanks for watching. Join me next time in my shed, and I'll keep revealing the wonders of the world. Oh no. That's all, folks.